Amelia, what are you doing here? David sneers, clutching Chloe's waist. Did you follow us? Chloe giggles. Honey, she probably heard they're hiring scrubbers. The basement is that way, Amelia, David mocks. You still smell like floor wax. This is the VIP wing. Amelia observes his smug face with a faint, cold smile. I'm just here to see if the lobby is truly clean. Go home. You're embarrassing yourself. The private elevator dings. Good morning, Madam Chair. The guard bows. The board is waiting. Amelia steps in. Thank you, Marcus. Please make sure the trash is removed immediately. It started on a Tuesday morning in their New Jersey villa. The sunlight hit the marble floors of the foyer, highlighting every speck of dust that Amelia was determined to erase. She was on her knees, the sharp, clinical scent of lemon bleach clinging to her skin. It was a smell she had grown used to. To her, it meant order. To her, it meant home. She heard the heavy thud of David's Italian leather loafers on the hardwood. He didn't greet her. He didn't ask how her morning was. He simply stopped a few feet away, his shadow falling over her like a cold shroud. Amelia didn't look up immediately. She noticed the way he shifted his weight, restless and impatient. Get up, Amelia, he said. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth that had once defined their early years. She paused, her cloth mid-swipe, and slowly stood. Her knees ached slightly, a dull reminder of the 3 years she'd spent playing the role of the perfect, invisible housewife. You're late for breakfast, she said softly, wiping her hands on her apron. David didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He didn't hand it to her. He threw it. The white papers fanned out in the air before hitting the wet floor she had just polished. One of them slid into a puddle of soapy water, the ink beginning to bleed. I'm done, David stated. He adjusted his silk tie in the hallway mirror, refusing to meet her eyes. I've filed for divorce. Sign them and be out by noon. Amelia looked down at the papers. The word dissolution stared back at her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply observed the way the paper absorbed the bleach. Why? She asked. The word was a mere whisper, a puff of air. David let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He finally turned to face her, his lip curling in disgust. Look at yourself, Amelia. You're pathetic. You spend your days scrubbing toilets and smelling like a hospital. He stepped closer, the scent of his expensive cologne clashing with the chemicals in the air. Chloe doesn't smell like bleach. She smells like Chanel No. 5 and old money. She's a woman who belongs at my side in the boardroom, not someone who spends her life on her knees with a scrub brush. Amelia noticed a small smudge on his collar, a pale pink lipstick mark, a pattern she had seen emerging for months, but chose to watch in silence. I gave up everything for this home, David, she said, her voice steady. I gave up my career to support yours. Your career? David scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. You were a supervisor at some cleaning company. Don't make it sound like you were running the world. You're a maid at heart, Amelia. And I'm a man who needs a queen. He walked toward the door, stopping only to kick a plastic bucket out of his way. The water splashed onto Amelia's shins. Keep the old SUV. Take whatever clothes you have. But leave the keys to the house on the counter. I don't want you haunting this place with that housewife stench anymore. Amelia watched him walk out. She watched the door close, the sound echoing through the empty polished halls. She didn't move for a long time. She just stood there in the silence of the house she had kept spotless for a man who viewed her as dirt. She walked to the hallway closet. Deep in the back, behind the mops and the vacuum bags, sat a small, battered black briefcase. It was scuffed and dusty, the leather peeling at the corners. David had laughed when she brought it into the house 3 years ago, calling it a relic of her janitor days. He had even offered to throw it in the trash for her. Amelia picked it up. She felt the weight of it in her hand. It was heavy, solid, and filled with a power David couldn't possibly comprehend. Inside wasn't just paper. Inside was the Con Dow, the golden seal of Clean Corp International. She stripped off her apron, letting it fall onto the wet floor. She didn't pack her dresses. She didn't pack the jewelry he had bought her to apologize for late nights. She only took her phone and the black briefcase. As she walked to the old SUV in the driveway, she didn't look back. She didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a storm that had finally been released from its bottle. David wanted a queen. He was about to find out that he had been living with an empress, and he had just lost his seat at her table. She started the engine. The scent of bleach was still on her hands, but as she gripped the steering wheel, she realized it didn't smell like a maid anymore. It smelled like a clean slate, and Amelia was very, very good at cleaning. Amelia pulled the old SUV into a secluded parking lot 3 miles from the villa. She sat for a moment, looking at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, her hair pulled into a practical bun, her skin smelling of cheap lemon detergent. She reached into the battered black briefcase and pulled out a single encrypted burner phone. She dialed a number she hadn't touched in 3 years. It was picked up on the first ring. "Ma'am?" The voice on the other end was trembling with relief. "Is it time?" "Send the car." "Sarah," Amelia said, her voice dropping an octave into a tone of cold command. "And have the legal team meet me at the penthouse. I need a full audit of Vantage Logistics. Every contract, every penny." "Right away, Chairwoman." Amelia stepped out of the SUV and left the keys in the ignition. She didn't look back. 10 minutes later, a matte black Rolls-Royce Ghost glided to the curb. A driver in white gloves stepped out, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the pavement. He opened the door, and the scent of bespoke leather and sandalwood replaced the lingering ghost of bleach. As the car sped toward the Manhattan skyline, Amelia pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall in dark waves over her shoulders. She stripped off the faded cardigan, revealing a tailored silk blouse underneath. The transformation was silent, surgical, and absolute. People often asked why the heiress to the Sterling Empire, the largest cleaning and facility management conglomerate in the country, would disappear for 3 years to live in a suburban villa with a mid-level logistics manager. The answer was simple. David had promised her a world where money didn't matter. On their first date, he had looked her in the eye and said, "I don't care if you're a waitress or a CEO, Amelia. I love the soul behind the title." She had wanted to believe him. She had needed to know if someone could love the woman, not the bank account. So, she had created a test. She had lost her job, moved into his world, and played the part of the devoted, invisible housewife. She had traded her board meetings for grocery lists and her power suits for aprons. For 2 years, the test held. But as David's small company began to grow, his soul began to rot. He didn't realize that his sudden success, the lucky breaks, the high-profile contracts, the seamless permits, wasn't luck at all. It was Amelia pulling strings from the kitchen table while he slept, ensuring her husband's dream stayed alive. She had been his guardian angel, and he had treated her like a footstool. The Rolls-Royce pulled into the private underground hangar of the Sterling Tower. The elevator took her directly to the 81st floor. When the doors opened, 60 executives stood in 2 perfect lines, heads bowed in silence. Amelia didn't stop. She walked straight to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, her heels clicking against the polished obsidian floor. Sarah, her lead assistant, stepped forward with a tablet. "The audit is complete." Ma'am," Sarah whispered. "It's exactly as you suspected. David has been funneling company funds into a private account for Chloe. He's also been over-leveraging his assets to buy that penthouse in Soho. He thinks he's a mogul." Amelia traced a finger along the glass. "And his primary contract?" "Vantage Logistics is currently a third-tier subcontractor for our Atlantic division," Sarah replied. "Technically, he works for us. He just doesn't know it yet. His entire revenue stream depends on a signature you haven't even signed yet." Amelia felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. It was like watching a crack form in a window, perfectly straight, inevitable. She thought about David's face when he threw those divorce papers. She thought about him calling her trash. "He told me to clean up," Amelia said, a faint smile touching her lips. "He was right. There's a lot of filth in this city that needs to be removed." She turned away from the window and sat at the massive mahogany desk that had once belonged to her father. She picked up a fountain pen, the gold nib catching the light. "Call the Atlantic Division," she ordered. "Tell them we're reviewing the subcontractor list for the gala next week. I want David Collins and his little girlfriend to be there. I want them to feel like they've finally made it to the top. And then, ma'am, Amelia signed a document with a flourish. And then, I'm going to show him how I handle a stain that won't come out. She leaned back, the storm behind her eyes finally beginning to surge. Grace isn't weakness, Sarah. It's just the silence before the control is exerted. Let David enjoy his last few days of being important. The cleaning crew is coming. David stood in front of the full-length mirror in their new Soho penthouse, the one he had mortgaged his company's future to afford. He adjusted the lapels of a tuxedo that cost more than Amelia's SUV. He looked successful. He looked like the mogul he had always promised himself he'd become. Across the room, Chloe was humming, applying a layer of power-red lipstick. She looked like a trophy. She smelled of expensive vanilla and ambition. "Did you hear back from the vice president?" David asked. His voice was tight, a thin veil over the panic humming in his chest. His primary creditor had called 3 times this morning. If this Clean Corp contract didn't sign tonight, he wasn't just broke, he was finished. Chloe smiled into the mirror, admiring her reflection. "Relax, David. Our Marcus, the VP, is practically obsessed with me. He said the chairwoman is looking for fresh blood to handle their logistics expansion. He's already put your proposal on her desk. He said we're as good as gold." David exhaled, a shaky, uneven breath. "Good. Because I put everything into that gift for her. That vintage 1950s Patek Philippe. It's a statement. It says we belong in her circle." He didn't mention that the watch had been bought with the company's tax withholdings. He didn't mention that the circle was currently a noose around his neck. He only saw the finish line. 3 miles away, in the silent, dimly lit command center of Sterling Tower, Amelia sat in a high-backed leather chair. The only light came from a wall of monitors. On screen 4, she watched a high-definition feed from a luxury boutique's security camera. She observed David. She noticed the way he kept touching his chest, right over his heart, a nervous tic he'd had since college whenever he was lying. She saw him swipe his 3rd credit card, the one he thought she didn't know about. She watched the cashier's face go neutral as the first 2 were declined. Amelia took a slow sip of herbal tea. The steam rose in a delicate curl, vanishing into the cool air of the office. She felt a strange, detached sort of pity. Not for the man, but for the memory of the person she thought he was. "They're leaving the boutique now, ma'am," Sarah said, standing in the shadows behind her. "Mr. Collins has also requested a VIP table right next to the stage. He told the event coordinator that he is a personal friend of the family." Amelia's eyes remained on the screen. A personal friend. How charming. She tapped a key on her keyboard. A spreadsheet appeared on screen 1. It was a map of David's debt. It was a messy, stained thing. High-interest loans, unpaid vendors, a pattern of reckless desperation. "Sarah," Amelia said softly, "look at the way he carries that briefcase, like it's a shield. He thinks he's bringing you a masterpiece, ma'am. He doesn't realize he's bringing his own confession." Amelia stood up, her silk gown whispering against the floor. She walked to the window, looking out at the city. The lights of New York looked like diamonds scattered on black velvet. It was beautiful, but only because it was curated. "Chloe thinks she's the one pulling the strings," Amelia observed. "She thinks her connection with Marcus is her secret weapon. She doesn't realize Marcus was my father's godson. She doesn't realize every insider tip he gave her was a script I wrote." She turned back to the monitors. David was helping Chloe into a town car. He looked toward the Sterling Tower, his eyes filled with a greedy, blind hope. He thought he was about to meet his savior. Amelia reached out and touched the screen, her finger resting right over David's face. "He told me I smelled like bleach," she whispered. "He told me to go home and dondepcho sachvao. Clean everything up." She walked toward the door, her movements graceful and deliberate. She didn't feel anger anymore. She only felt the cold, clinical necessity of the task ahead. "Sarah, make sure the janitorial staff is on standby for the gala tonight," Amelia said as she stepped into the private elevator. "I don't want a single smudge on the glass. I don't want a single speck of dust on the stage." The elevator doors began to close, reflecting her image. A woman of absolute, terrifying composure. "And Sarah?" "Yes, ma'am." Amelia's eyes flashed with a sudden, sharp intensity. Prepare the heavy-duty cleaners. There's a lot of trash piled up at the VIP table, and I intend to don Dep Cho Sach Vow tonight. The doors shut. The silence in the office was absolute. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the hunter was finally stepping out of the shadows. David thought he was walking into a gold mine. He was actually walking into a furnace, and Amelia was the one holding the match. The St. Regis Ballroom was a cavern of opulence, a place where the air itself felt expensive. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling like frozen explosions of light, casting sharp, eye-clinical shadows across the sea of black silk and polished diamonds. Every surface was a mirror, the marble floors, the silver trays, the eyes of the guests. It was a world built on the illusion of perfection, exactly the kind of world David Collins had spent his entire life trying to buy his way into. David walked through the crowd with a forced swagger, his hand resting possessively on Chloe's lower back. He felt the weight of the Patek Philippe box in his pocket, his last gamble. To anyone else, he looked like a rising star. To someone who knew what to look for, he looked like a man standing on a cracking sheet of ice. "Look at this place, David," Chloe whispered, her eyes darting greedily from one diamond necklace to another. She smelled of vanilla and desperation. "This is what success feels like. Can you imagine? No more Jersey. No more boring dinners. No more... Amelia." David's jaw tightened. "Amelia was a weight around my neck, Chloe. She belonged in the shadows, scrubbing the dirt we walked on. Once this contract is signed, I'm putting that house on the market. Or better yet, I'll turn it into a warehouse for the industrial solvents. It's all she ever understood anyway." Chloe let out a sharp, brittle laugh. A warehouse? How poetic. The maid of Jersey replaced by actual cleaning supplies. It's almost a promotion for her. They reached the base of the grand staircase leading to the VIP mezzanine. This was the inner sanctum, guarded by men in suits that cost more than David's first car. The velvet rope was a physical barrier between the people who mattered and the people who just wanted to matter. David presented his invitation with a trembling hand. He noticed the guard's eyes linger on his cufflink, a cheap gold-plated knockoff. He felt a sudden flash of heat in his neck. He hated being noticed. He hated the way these people looked through him. "David Collins, Vantage Logistics," he stated, his voice booming too loudly for the refined space. "I'm here to see the chairwoman. We have a private appointment." The guard didn't blink. He pressed a finger to his earpiece, listened for a silent eternity, and then pulled the rope aside. "The chairwoman is waiting for you at the balcony rail. Please, be brief. She is a busy woman." As they climbed the stairs, the noise of the gala below began to fade, replaced by a heavy, pressurized silence. The air here was colder. It smelled of cedarwood, old money, and something sharp. Something that reminded David of the villa on a Sunday morning. At the edge of the mezzanine, silhouetted against the glowing Manhattan skyline, stood a woman. She was motionless, draped in a gown of midnight blue silk that moved like liquid shadow. She held a glass of Bordeaux, the dark wine swirling in a slow, rhythmic pattern that matched the beating of David's frantic heart. She didn't turn. She stood there like a predator watching the valley from a cliffside. "She's magnificent," Chloe hissed, her voice full of envy. "Go on, David. Give her the watch." David stepped forward, his shoes clicking against the obsidian floor. He felt small. For the first time in his life, his height and his expensive suit felt like a costume that didn't fit. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing off the glass walls. "Madam Chairwoman," he began, "I'm David Collins. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to present my vision for Vantage Logistics. We believe that with your backing, we can sweep the competition aside." The woman still didn't move. She observed the reflection of the city in the glass. She noticed the way David's reflection looked distorted, a small, frantic figure caught in the center of a very large web. She noticed the pattern of his anxiety, the way he adjusted his tie every 10 seconds, the way he shifted his weight. Amelia took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine. The bitterness of the grapes was a perfect mirror to the cold satisfaction in her chest. She watched David in the reflection. She watched him pull the watchbox from his pocket, his hand shaking. I also brought a small token of my appreciation, David continued, stepping closer. A vintage Patek. A timeless piece for a woman who clearly understands the value of time. Amelia felt a faint cold smile touch her lips. He was trying to buy her with her own money. The money he had stolen from the tax accounts of the company she secretly owned. The house, Chloe whispered behind him, her voice carrying in the silent air. Tell her about the expansion. David nodded. We're already preparing to convert our Jersey assets into a central hub, madam. We're clearing out the old structures to make room for progress. Removing the clutter, you might say. Amelia finally set her glass down on the stone railing. The sound was like a gavel hitting a block. She began to turn, her movement slow, rhythmic, and terrifyingly graceful. You're very good at removing clutter, aren't you, David? She said, her voice a low, melodic thrum. David froze. That voice. It was impossible. Amelia stepped fully into the light, her face emerging from the shadows. She watched the blood drain from his face until it was as white as the marble below. So tell me, she said, her smile turning razor sharp. Is the house clean enough for you yet? Amelia didn't rush. She walked with the deliberate, heavy grace of someone who owned the air everyone else was breathing. The spotlight shifted, trailing the hem of her midnight blue gown as she moved toward the center of the stage. The murmurs of the crowd died instantly, replaced by a silence so thick it felt pressurized. David stood paralyzed at the balcony rail. His fingers went numb. The vintage champagne flute he had been clutching slipped. It didn't just fall, it exploded against the obsidian floor. The sound was a sharp, crystalline echo of the porcelain cup that had shattered in their kitchen just days ago. A spray of gold liquid and jagged glass landed on his expensive loafers, the same shoes that were supposed to carry him into a new life. He didn't notice. He couldn't breathe. Amelia reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. The metallic click echoed through the ballroom. She looked out over the sea of faces, but her eyes landed on David. She observed the way his skin had turned the color of ash. She noticed the way Chloe was trembling, her power-red lipstick looking like a wound on her pale face. Good evening, Amelia said. Her voice was a low, melodic thrum that carried to every corner of the room. Thank you all for joining us to celebrate another year of sterling excellence. As many of you know, our expansion plans for the Atlantic Division require a new logistics partner. David's heart hammered against his ribs. A spark of delusional hope flickered. Maybe she was doing this to win him back. Maybe this was a grand gesture. I have spent the last 3 years personally vetting our potential candidates, Amelia continued, her gaze never wavering. I've watched them when they thought no one was looking. I've tested their resilience, their loyalty, and most importantly, their standards. She paused, taking a slow, steady breath. Vantage Logistics was at the top of our list. They were given every opportunity to succeed. They were given contracts they didn't earn and lucky breaks that were actually gifts. Chloe stepped forward, her voice a desperate, high-pitched hiss. David, do something, tell her. I tell her we have the watch. Amelia ignored her. However, after a final, intensive review, I have decided to terminate all current agreements with Vantage Logistics, effective immediately. We will also be blacklisting the company and its principal officers from any future sterling contracts. A collective gasp rippled through the room. David felt the floor tilt. Amelia, he choked out, his voice cracking. You can't do this. We have a deal. You're just doing this because you're hurt. Amelia didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him with the cold clinical detachment of a surgeon removing a tumor. I'm doing this because CleanCorp has a reputation to uphold, David, she said into the mic, and your company fails to meet our most basic requirement, hygiene, not of your trucks, but of your character. Your moral hygiene is beneath the standards of this firm. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone caught perfectly. You told me to go home and don dep chosach vow. You told me I smelled of bleach and that I should focus on cleaning up the trash. She smiled, a faint, razor-sharp expression that didn't reach her eyes. I took your advice, David. I've spent the last 48 hours don dep cleaning up. I've scrubbed the rot out of my portfolio. I've sanitized my associations, and I realized that the biggest stain in my life was standing right there, holding a stolen watch and pretending to be a man. She stepped back from the podium, her silhouette regal against the Manhattan skyline. Security will escort Mr. Collins and his guests to the service exit. Please, Marcus. I make sure the floor is mopped after they leave. I don't want any lingering traces of bleach. David reached out to grab the railing, but his legs gave way. He sank to his knees amidst the shattered glass of his own celebration. As the guards moved in, he looked up at the woman he had treated like a servant. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was already turning to her board, her mind already on the next phase of her empire. Amelia's final words echoed in the silent ballroom as she walked off the stage. You told me to clean it up, David, so I started by cleaning you out of my life. And I have to say, everything looks much brighter now. The cold night air of Manhattan hit David like a physical blow as the security guard stepped back, leaving him standing on the sidewalk outside the St. Regis. His tuxedo was rumpled, his dignity scattered like the glass on the ballroom floor. He turned to Chloe, his eyes pleading. Chloe, wait. I can fix this. I still have the Soho place. We just need to... Chloe didn't let him finish. She was already waving down a taxi, her face a mask of cold indifference. The Soho place was mortgaged to the hilt, David. I checked. You don't have a business. You don't have a house. And you certainly don't have a future. She stepped into the cab, not once looking back at the man she had called a mogul only an hour before. The taillights faded into the city traffic, leaving David alone in the silence of his own making. He realized then that when you build a life on sand, you shouldn't be surprised when the tide comes in. 40 floors above the street, the world was quiet. Amelia sat at her mahogany desk, on the city lights shimmering behind her like a sea of fallen stars. There was no music here, no applause, just the steady, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. She observed the city. She noticed how small the cars looked from this height, how insignificant the drama of the streets became when you held the perspective of the sky. Sarah entered quietly, placing a single leather folder on the desk. The foundation papers are ready, ma'am. The New Beginnings Fund. It will provide housing and professional training for 500 single mothers in the tri-state area this year. Amelia picked up her fountain pen. The weight of it felt familiar, grounded. She signed her name with a slow, deliberate stroke. The ink dried instantly. They asked for a quote to put on the building's dedication plaque, Sarah added softly. Amelia leaned back, looking at her hands. The faint scent of lemon detergent was gone, replaced by the neutral, clean scent of the high altitude. She thought about the 3 years she spent on her knees, scrubbing floors while David dreamt of a queen. She hadn't been hiding. She had been observing. She had learned more about David's character in one morning with a mop than she had in 1,000 nights in silk. Tell them this, Amelia said, her voice steady and calm. Never look down on the woman who prepares your meals, because she might be the one who decides the final course of your career. She stood up and walked to the window. She felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with her bank account and everything to do with her truth. She had donned up, cleaned up, her life. The trash was gone. The air was clear. Grace isn't weakness. It isn't silence. Grace is the ultimate form of control. It is the ability to walk through the dirt without letting it stick to you, and the wisdom to know when it's time to take out the trash. If this story reminded you of your own worth, remember, your value isn't defined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to rise. Like and share this if you believe that a woman's strength is often found in the places the world forgets to look.